And again, my name is Leanne Foster, and I am with Provider Outreach and Education at WPS Government Health Administrators. Again, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on understanding authorized and delegated officials. I will start with our disclaimer. So the material that I am presenting today is accurate as of today. As you all know, Medicare changes often, so please make sure that you are reviewing official CMS communications, which includes CMS and WPS GHA websites for the most up-to-date CMS rules and regulations. As I answer questions today, these questions are also being answered based off of current CMS regulations. Photographing, screenshotting, and recording of this education for profit-making purposes is prohibited by CMS. As I mentioned moments ago, we did start recording of this session, so that means that it will be available to you on our YouTube channel as an encore presentation. So it'll be possible for you to view that if you want to see it again, or you can share it with anyone who maybe wasn't able to attend but might find this information helpful. That will be posted on our YouTube channel as quickly as possible after this session, usually within a few days, but certainly sometime next week. So I'll start with our agenda for today. So today we are focusing on authorized and delegated officials. The goal of this session is to help you have a better understanding by the end of the differences between what an authorized official is versus a delegated official. And this includes what their responsibilities are and their signatory rights as an authorized and a delegated official, along with what the different eligibility requirements are for a delegated versus an authorized official. They are different. And then we're also going to spend some time today about how to maintain those authorized and delegated officials on your enrollment record. And this includes adding authorized and delegated officials, making changes to those authorized and delegated officials, and removing them if you need to from your organization. Obviously, all of that can change, and we will talk about that both electronically and through our paper application process. I do want to start with some acronyms. Today I will be using quite a few of them. You've already heard me mention a couple of them. So authorized officials I'm typically referring to as an AO. A DO is a delegated official. Date of birth is DOB. I am going to talk about a couple of titles in their abbreviated form. So CEO is going to be Chief Executive Officer for today's discussion. CFO will be Chief Financial Officer. CFR is our Code of Federal Regulation. I'm also going to talk about INA a little bit today, which is Identity and Access, and there's a system referred to as Identity and Access that we'll touch on today. The Provider Enrollment Chain and Ownership System, also known as PACOS. I'll also be talking a little bit about the Program Integrity Manual, or the PIM, and I apologize, there is one typo here that should say SSN versus SSA for Social Security number. So I'd like to start with the definition of both authorized officials and delegated officials, because as I mentioned moments ago, they are similar, but they are also very different. An AO is defined in CFR sections 424.501, and they're defined as an appointed official who the organization has granted legal authority to, meaning that they can obligate the organization to abide by regulations, statutes, and they can legally bind the organization into contracts, okay? They have that legal authority, and every entity is required to have at least one of these on file. Also in that same CR, there's a definition for a delegated official, and a delegated official is defined as an appointed official whom the organization has granted authority, or rather delegated the authority, and it's usually the authorized official that's delegating this authority to report changes on existing enrollment information and to revalidate. And we'll talk a little bit more about their signatory responsibilities, but a delegated official is someone who does not have quite the same legally binding authority as an authorized official. For more information, more specifics, I have asked Tom, and it looks like he's put that there, thank you, has placed a link in the chat for CFR section 424.501. That way you have that to reference if you'd like to review that further. Also a link to Chapter 10, the Program Integrity Manual, will be placed in that chat as well. That provides the same definitions, just a little bit more direct way to get to that. But it also includes references to specifics for each CMS 855 application with regards to how authorized and delegated officials work for those. Next, I'd like to take a look at eligibility for each role. So to be an authorized official, the individual must have high-ranking control, have a high rank in the organization or entity that they are listed as the authorized official for. So what does this mean? We are essentially, again, looking for someone who can legally bind that organization into contracts and commit them to abiding by all Medicare statutes and regulations. Some examples of people that would be eligible for that would be that CEO, that Chief Executive Officer, the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. If someone is a general partner, they can be an authorized official. And if somebody is an owner, whether that is direct or indirect, they are eligible to be an authorized official. And you notice I will continue to say they're eligible to be. Just because someone is an owner, and this is something that we often see on enrollment applications, there's an assumption that they're going to be made an authorized official. They do actually have to make that selection or designation as it's appropriate on the coordinating CMS 855 form to let us know that they want to be an authorized official. It doesn't happen by default. It has to be declared on that application. And for that eligibility, when we're processing applications, we are looking for these qualifying roles in the CMS 855 form, whether it's electronic or on paper, and we'll talk about that more as we talk about adding those roles in those sections. Now, I do want to be clear, I've mentioned a couple of titles here. I've mentioned CEO, CFO. Those are not the only titles that are eligible to be the authorized official. Board members can also be potentially that authorized official, but again, it comes down to, are they a high-ranking official? Do they have the legal authority to bind that entity into a legal contract? And again, you'll hear me say this a lot, commit them to abiding by all Medicare statutes and regulations. On the other hand, we have delegated officials, and you're going to notice some similarities. A delegated official can be an owner. It can be a general partner. So again, as I was just talking about, just because you're an owner doesn't mean you're necessarily the authorized official. Perhaps your entity has decided that you'll be a delegated official. Maybe there's a higher majority partner or a higher ranking official. So you can be one or the other here. General partner, again, could be a delegated official. Director officer, we see this a lot with groups and organizations that may have a board of directors. They may make some of them a delegated official. And then also, this is where it gets a little unique, is a W-2 managing employee. So W-2 managing employee is someone who is directly working for that group or organization, and they are eligible to have signature rights for certain application actions. Examples would include if there is a business office manager, or you have a billing manager, or other credentialing staff. Their delegated officials typically are a little bit more available for signing applications on an as-needed basis. And that's one of the reasons a lot of people will, or a lot of groups will have those delegated officials. But I do want to point out that delegated officials are optional. Groups and organizations are not required to have a delegated official. They are, however, required to have at least one authorized official. Both AOs and DOs will be able to sign applications, as I mentioned. However, there are going to be some differences in what applications they can sign. So an authorized official is going to be able to sign for initial enrollments. Again, I mentioned they're going to have that ability to legally bind that group or organization into a legal contract. Authorized officials are also going to be able to sign changes. So whether that be changes in ownership, changes in address, it could also include changes with reassignments, whether that is adding group members and reassignments to your entity, or is that removing reassignments? They can sign for all of those changes. Does an authorized official need to sign for adding another delegated official? Those are the kinds of changes they can sign. Pretty much, they can sign for any change. Authorized officials can also sign revalidations. Now, you're going to see some of these same items underneath the delegated official. But again, the delegated officials can sign for changes, including reassignments. In fact, that's oftentimes what delegated officials are signing for, and also revalidations. And I want to make a note on under revalidations. When revalidating, we don't necessarily need every signature from every authorized or delegated official on file. We need one, and it needs to be somebody who's on file. And then we also need the signatures from anybody who's being added to those roles. So anything new, any of those changes that are coming in on revalidations. With that, I am going to pause one moment just to see if there are any questions in the chat. But before I check with Tom, I do have a pre-submitted question that I wanted to touch base on here. And the question is if the requirements as far as eligibility for the authorized and delegated officials between the CMS 855A and CMS 855B are the same. And the rules for who can be an authorized or delegated official are the same, regardless of whether or not you are completing a CMS 855I or a CMS 855B. There will be a little bit of a difference in how you report the information, but and we'll talk about that, but the eligibility requirements are the same. And I want to point out, you'll notice that I'm talking about the 855A and the 855B, and those are the two applications where you can manipulate those authorized and delegated officials. As we talk through this, we will talk about the 855I and where those AOs and DOs will need to sign, but I want to make it very clear that you cannot add a delegated or an authorized official through a group member's reassignment application. It has to come in as a change to that entity or that organization, whether that's through that 855A or that 855B application. So with that, I'll check in with Tom. Tom, do we have any questions in the chat?
We do have a couple of questions, but I want to make a comment first. A couple people asked me questions directly off the bat, and that information was covered in the definitions and eligibility slides. So we have gone through that. If you need more clarification, please provide that back into the chat so that I know to re-ask that question. Otherwise, I'm not going to ask those questions again. First question actually comes from slide 6 for definitions. And it says the slide references 0.502. You said 501. Which one is correct?
Oh, I apologize. That is a misspeak on my part. It is 502.
Second question is from Chad, and it says, can you specify what a delegated official cannot sign for?
Basically, a delegated official cannot sign an initial enrollment application for the entity. So they can sign changes, they can sign on reassignments, they can sign on revalidations. A delegated official just cannot be the only signer on an application that's for an initial enrollment for a group or an organization or an entity. The delegated official cannot legally bind the entity itself into that contract or that agreement with Medicare.
All right, that's all the questions we have at this time. Again, feel free to put those questions in chat at any time.
All right. So next we're going to spend time talking about, sorry about that, talking about enrollment for authorized and delegated officials. And as I mentioned earlier, we are going to walk through both electronic and paper. So I'm going to go ahead and start with electronic. I will stress that this is the most efficient method for adding and removing AOs and DOs from an enrollment record. And before I get started, I want to stress I'm talking about from an enrollment record. We are going to talk about that identity and access management system in a little bit, but I just want to preface this section by saying that your authorized officials for your identity and access management system, your INA system, may not be exactly the same as what is in PACOS, in that provider enrollment chain and ownership system. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So right now I'm talking about if you are adding or manipulating your authorized and delegated officials through your enrollment through an application being submitted through PACOS. So when you are in PACOS, you'll start a change application. It's going to be a standard change application. And when you tell them that you're changing enrollment information, you're going to get a list of the sections. And when you're on a CMS 855 application, the topic title is going to be individuals with ownership, interest, and managing control. That's always going to be the topic that you're going to want to select. Now, there will be some differences here between the 855A and the 855B. And the difference is really you just don't designate if somebody's going to be an authorized or delegated official in this topic for an 855A, but you do for an 855B. However, in both situations, you do need to look at this individual with ownership, interest, and managing control. An individual cannot have signature rights, cannot be an authorized or delegated official if they are not listed in your ownership and managing control section of your enrollment record. We need to have that established enrollment and basic information off of that individual before we can allow them to sign for applications. So regardless, you're going to want to access the individual's and ownership interest and or managing control topic in PACOS to ensure that that individual is listed and with the appropriate roles. And we're going to talk through that a little bit. If they are listed, take a look, see if anything needs to be adjusted. But what I'm showing here is how you would add somebody. So when you're in the topic summary, you're going to see the add information button, which you'll see in that red box on the image that is on the left side of your screen. And that is then going to bring you to the image that you see on the right. And this is going to be that basic information about that individual that you're adding as an authorized or delegated official. It's going to ask for some base information, first name, last name. It's going to ask for TIN type, which, because we're talking individuals, is always going to be that SSN. You are going to then give that TIN, you're going to give that SSN and date of birth. You'll notice that some fields have a red asterisk. This designates a required field. You have to make sure that you provide that information. If you do not, PACOS will give you a warning message telling you that something's missing. It's not going to let you go past this page. Any field that's not designated with a red X or asterisk is typically an optional field. However, I do encourage you to provide as much information as possible because this information is leveraged when we are processing the application to check these individuals against various watch lists and databases that CMS requires MACs to monitor for any bad actors to make sure that we're not allowing bad actors that would do harm to the Medicare Trust Fund into the system, certainly without some consultation with CMS, depending on the scenario. So you'll notice that title is an optional field, middle name is an optional field, and then the National Provider Identifier, NPI, is an optional field. We do recognize that not necessarily everyone who's listed in this section is going to have an NPI, but if they have one, again, it does help us with some of those background research on those watch lists and those databases for bad actors that we have to do. So the next page that you're going to see is going to ask you the question whether or not the individual that you're adding is an authorized or delegated official or neither. Now, this is the question that will present itself to you on an 855B. This will not present itself to you on an 855A, and we'll talk about that. Typically with an A, you just have to select a signer from the individuals in 6 with the eligible roles. That is how the paper form is currently set as well. On the 855B, you do need to designate if somebody is an authorized or delegated official, in addition to the other roles that they'll list. So here they will select authorized or delegated official or neither. So it is possible you have somebody who's listed in this section that isn't either of those roles, and that's completely fine. So make sure you're selecting that. The other piece is to make sure that you indicate the appropriate effective date. This is key when adding somebody new. And if you're removing somebody, that termination date is also key, because that is going to be either the first date in the event of an effective date or the last date in the event that you're removing somebody with a deactivation or a delete date. That's going to be the date we're going to allow those signatures. That's the date that's going to be added into their enrollment record. And we won't be able to accept their signature before that date. So make sure that that is appropriate. Once you have all of the required fields for the application, depending on what other changes you may be making, or if it's an initial enrollment, obviously you'll fill out that entire form. It's important to understand how the signature section is going to work for your providers. So to sign the application, you are going to be asked, and it's this first box towards the top of this image, the signatory for organizational enrollment. So you're going to select the individuals that are eligible from the authorized signer box. PACOS will review those roles that you selected in that individuals with ownership or managing control. It's going to give you a list of those that are eligible to sign. Now, if you are adding somebody, you're obviously going to need to select them. If you're an authorized official, that's the signature that you need. If there's a delegated official, you're going to want to have that delegated and a current authorized official sign the application. Adding a delegated official is always going to require a second signature. We need an authorized official to, how do I want to say this, confirm that yes, this person is being delegated that authority to sign. So you'll make that selection. You can do this for every individual. So if you go through, select your authorized official. If there's a delegated official, you'll go through, you select that, and you'll continue to do that until everybody who needs to sign for your application has been accounted for. The next step is going to be identifying whether or not you're going to sign the application electronically or you're going to upload a paper signature. So if you're looking at the image on the left, you'll see 2 radio buttons. Top one is electronic. By selecting that electronic, it's going to trigger an email to the individual that's listed. Here you're showing that I'm signing an application. It would send me that signature with instructions on how to access and attach my signature electronically to the application. That can sometimes take a little bit of time. It goes out immediately and it can be signed immediately, but typically we see where that might take a day or two to append that signature before the MAC can see it. But that's how you sign that electronically. I have selected upload here so that I can show you what you would also see. If you select upload, that means you are uploading what we consider a wet signature, an original signature. You're uploading a certification statement. And typically you're going to want to make sure that you're utilizing the certification or attestation statement that PACOS is creating for you when you're selecting your authorized and delegated officials. And you'll upload it here on the signature page. Unfortunately, the way PACOS is set up, it does have those certification steps pages in the documentation and required signatures page. So if you hit select upload and hit next page, you will see what that bottom image that's shifted slightly to the left. It is showing you the signature pages that you can open up and either have them signed electronically with a DocuSign. Again, those have to have the proper notations, including the date and time stamp. Or if you're having someone physically sign it, this document is going to be printed with a tracking number for your application. So it can be signed and then uploaded to your application. That is an acceptable way of attaching that signature. So before I go into how you would add or adjust your authorized and delegated officials through paper, I want to come back and talk about that identity and access system, because this is something that impacts your PACOS signatures. So your identity and access system is a system that is utilized to manage access. So it's not managing the signers in your enrollment record per se. You do need to establish an authorized official when you are enrolling an entity or an organization for the first time, because you're obviously going to need that user ID and password for that entity. That access is going to need to be established. Once you establish that, if you're replacing that authorized official, then you would need to come back out to the identity and access system and establish that authorized and delegated official. And it can require some additional steps as far as submitting a certification statement to CMS. And that is because you're adjusting the identity and access management system, not PACOS. So what an authorized official in the identity and access system can do, they are able to manage user access and who has connections to their organizations and entities inside PACOS. So an authorized official can sign applications, but they're still going to have to be established on the enrollment record in PACOS. You can't just change it here and have that be updated on the enrollment record. The two systems don't talk. Identity and access is purely about who can touch my files in PACOS. So that AO in the INA system can also designate a user admin, and they can make connections for staff users and also those surrogates. But I just want to be very clear that changing your authorized official information in the identity and access system does not change it in the PACOS system. To make any, I also want to point out, you're not going to add your AOs out here either, unless you want them to be the authorized official for whomever has access to your enrollment information in PACOS. But if you need to make changes to that authorized official for your entity, it can be done through the My Profile page. and it'll walk you through the steps of making those changes. It'll show you your existing authorized official and allow you to make changes. So when you go into that My Profile page, what you're going to see is screens that look like this. The screen on the left is the landing page for that My Profile page. And if you are the AO or a staff user for multiple organizations, you can search by that employer. If you need to add connections, if you need to be the authorized official for an organization, you can do that here. It is going to ask you to complete some fields, which you are seeing on the right side of your screen, that smaller image. It's going to ask for name, title, it's going to ask for phone number and contact information. And then it is going to ask you to select the role that you're looking for. Again, this is not going to change anything in PACOS. This is about who has control in that identity and access system. And depending on which option you select, which is authorized official, access manager, or staff end user, it may ask you to also complete and submit a certification statement. And that is going to CMS, again, for access purposes. And I can tell you the one that asks for that is the authorized official. Before I move into the paper sections, I think this is probably a good time to just check in with Tom and see if we have any more questions in the chat.
We do actually have some different questions. So first, can delegated officials sign an 855I initial enrollment application?
Excellent question, and the answer is yes, they can. An initial I enrollment application is really considered managing a reassignment. If you have that I that's joining your group, they can sign for that reassignment. It's considered a change, and that is okay. It's just the initial enrollments for that group or organization itself that they can't sign.
All right, next, our CEO, who is our authorized official, is leaving our organization. Do we just have to go to PCOS and update that, or is there something that has to be done ahead of time? What's the process?
With that, it will need to go into PACOS and be updated for sure. You'll do a change application. You'll be able to remove your existing authorized. It looks like your CEO is leaving the organization. So if they themselves need to be fully removed from your organization, you can do that as well through the same application. The one thing that I would recommend is checking the PACOS access for the group. If that CEO is the AO on that identity and access system, you're going to want to get them removed from that and add the new authorized official there as well. And they are separate processes. You're not going to be able to update that INA system by making the updates in PACOS, because again, those two systems do not talk beyond who's allowed to manipulate the files.
Okay, next is our AOs, DOs, and board members background checked.
Yes, they're all checked against the watch lists and databases that CMS has max utilized to check for bad actors. So there's no exception to that. Anybody who's listed as ownership, managing control, that's individuals and, as an aside, organizations. So if there's parent companies, those are checked across those databases and those watch lists as well.
All right, next question. What do I click on from PICO's homepage to get to the information on slide 10?
From the PACOS homepage for slide 10, you're going to need to go into My Associates and get into the enrollment. So when you get into the landing page, you'll see the My Associates. From there, you'll scroll all the way down and you should be able to see the enrollments that you have connections to, and you'll want to access the appropriate entity. And then from there, you will go into more, there'll be a more options button. And from there, you'll select that you're wanting to make that change. So you have to actually initiate an application to get to that same slide that you saw on slide 10. Or that you saw on slide 10. If you just want to see who's currently on file, You could just view your enrollment information. There will be a link in that same place that'll allow you to just view that enrollment information if you want to see them outside of processing an application.
All right. Next, where do you find the change application?
The change application, so the change application is going to, if we're talking electronic, you'll go into that organization and you'll select more options. And the options that you get there are initial enrollment, revalidation, and termination, and then that change of information. By selecting change of information, PACOS will walk you through a few subsequent questions just to make sure that it takes you to the proper set of topics, which will then be your application. That is as close to starting a change application as you get. It's all about answering those questions on the front end.
The next question you may want to hold to the end and you can tell me yes or no. But I'm being trained to take over the credentialing for our organization. Is there anything I need to do before the end of my training? The current credentialer is retiring.
That one, I think I'd like to get a little bit more context as to what they're looking at. I can also send a response to that with our YouTube playlist for provider enrollment that you might find beneficial. If there's anything specific, because provider enrollment can be such a vast topic, feel free to throw those into the chat and I'll go ahead and get a response out to you on that. Any other questions?
No, that was our last one.
Excellent, thank you. And I do see that Tom, thank you, has put the Identity and Access System Quick Reference Guide. I want to just make sure that I mention that because there's a lot of good information in that guide that will help identify user roles, who's eligible for user roles as far as the INA system and as far as manipulating your enrollment information and connections that need to be made to do that inside PACOS. There's also some step-by-steps of how to do certain activities, again, in that identity and access to make sure that you have the proper system access and setup to make navigating and submitting applications through PACOS simpler for you. Next, let's talk about how to accomplish these same tasks, but using the paper CMS 855 applications. Now you can accomplish these tasks through the 855B and the 855A, but I'm going to talk about both of them, but I am going to talk about the CMS 855B first. So this would be for Part B providers that are submitting those CMS 1500 or those 837 P claims. So this is section 6 of that form, and it's going to ask for a lot of the same information, actually the identical information as PACOS would, but in slightly different format. So in section 6, they're going to have to list their name, their title, their date of birth, their social security number. You're also going to want to make sure you look at those check boxes on the top. If you have a brand new entity that's just enrolling, it's going to be add, but if they're brand new, if that add's not selected, it's not going to be a problem. But we are going to need some effective dates there. If you're making a change, we're going to need that effective date. If you're removing somebody, we're going to need that effective date. And then you're going to have to select what we call a qualifying role. So you're going to have to select all of the roles the individual in this section may have. So if they are an owner, whether that's direct or indirect, and an authorized official, you would select both boxes. Now what you're seeing highlighted in green here are all of the roles that are eligible to be an authorized official. So you're seeing authorized officials selected, you're seeing the 5% or greater direct indirect owner, you're seeing the director officer and the partner completed. Now those, it's important to note that I haven't selected delegated official because we're talking authorized officials at this point. Contracted managing employees are not going to be eligible to be an authorized official. W-2 managing employees are not eligible to be an authorized official either, unless they also hold one of the qualifying roles. One that we might see is a W-2 managing employee that's also a director. Because of that directorship role, they can be an authorized official. But you're never going to have an authorized official that is just a W-2 managing employee. It's not considered someone with a high enough rank. So those ownership roles, that partner role, that director officer role, those are what we would call qualifying roles for an authorized official. Now for a DO, it's going to look a little bit different. So you still need to fill out section 6 with all of the appropriate information. You still need to indicate their qualifying roles, and you'll notice director, officer, owner, partner, they can be eligible to be a delegated official. But now we're getting into the area where a W-2 managing employee could be a delegated official. A W-2 managing employee could be a delegated official without one of the other qualifying roles. Again, that W-2 establishes that relationship with that organization. And this is the example I gave earlier, where you have a business manager, a billing manager, or you have credentialing staff that you want to be able to sign those reassignments for your membership coming in. Moving on to the CMS 855A. Now section 6 is completed and will always need to be completed for that authorized official. But what you're going to notice is that they're not going to be designating themselves as an authorized official. They still have to be qualified, but they're actually going to designate themselves in Section 15. They're going to designate that the authorized official by signing Section 15 versus a checkbox in Section 6. Their qualifying roles are the same as they are in the 855B. They just don't have that authorized or delegated checkbox. I do want to state, though, with both 855As and 855Bs, you can have multiple authorized officials. You can have multiple delegated officials. There's no limit to how many authorized officials you can have, provided all of them have the qualifying roles necessary. So you can have multiple. There's also no limit to the delegated officials, but I do want to stress that the delegated officials are optional. So you don't have to have one, but you can. And again, oftentimes they have them for the purpose of just being more available for signatures. Same thing with the 855A for the DO. You do not designate them as a delegated official in Section 6. It's just not a function of Section 6. They will also simply sign Section 15, but it's 15C, indicating that they're a delegated official. What I need to stress here, though, is if you're adding a delegated official for the very first time, it will require a second signature, and that second signature is the authorized official granting that delegated official power, if you will, for those applications. You'll notice that I haven't spoken a whole lot about contracted managing employees with authorized and delegated officials. And what you're seeing here is just Section 6 for the 855B, where you can indicate contracted managing employee. That is because contracted managing employees cannot be an authorized or a delegated official. Typically, these are employees that are for an outside company that might be doing credentialing, might be doing billing. Now, there's an exception to this, and that exception is if that contracted managing employee has another qualifying role, whether that be that they're a contracted managing employee and they're a director officer, they're a partner, or they're some type of owner, then they would be able to sign because they have those other qualifying roles. But you can't have somebody whose only relationship is a contracted managing employee as an authorized or a delegated official, and that is true with all applications. CMS really wants the individuals that are signing these applications to somehow be directly connected with those entities or organizations that they're signing on the behalf of. So the question came up earlier about the signing of initial 855I applications, and this is actually a really good example of it. If you're submitting through PACOS or the paper CMS 855I, and there is a reassignment, so you're having that completed for one of your members, there are always going to be two signatures required. One from the individual that's enrolling, because they are binding themselves saying, yes, I'm joining this entity, this organization, and then one by a representative from that entity that they're joining. So what you're seeing here are just examples of the signature pages as they'll look, whether you're submitting that application through PACOS or on a paper 855I for that group member. Delegated officials can sign that, and actually if you look at the paper, it's going to show delegated or authorized official. So we get delegated officials that sign for those new 855I applications for group members all the time. The key here is that that delegated official needs to be on the system. It needs to be in PACOS when that application comes in. So if we get an application for that 855I with a reassignment on it, and the signer, whether that's the authorized or the delegated official, is not yet in PACOS, we can't process that application until it is. This is also a good example of where I mentioned that date. Make sure that date's accurate, because we're going to look at the signature date here to see if they were eligible to sign on that date. So just making sure that all of that is updated. So with that, I'm going to check in with Tom. Do we have any questions in the chat?
We do. First one, how much time do we have to update on a new authorized official after they leave?
So an authorized official, you're going to want to get that changed as soon as possible. That is typically something that you're going to need changed before you send in any applications that require that individual signature. And my recommendation is getting that done in the 30 days from that change happening. If it doesn't happen, what you're going to run into is possible development on any subsequent member applications that you send in that individual is signed. So we want to make sure we get that signed. Again, that's the individual that is legally binding that entity to follow Medicare regulations and guidelines. So it's super, super important that you get that changed. It is also something that can be changed in advance, where you can give us a future end date, and you can add that authorized delegated official up to 60 days before they become that new authorized delegated official. So I do recommend you doing that as soon as possible.
All right, next question. Do we have to update the authorized official on each of our profiles in PICOS, or is there a way to update it as a total group?
So you'll update, if you're talking about the individual enrollments, you do have to go into each enrollment and update them individually with separate applications. Now, if you have an enrollment that, say, has 10 provider transaction access or PTAN numbers on it, if they're all under the same enrollment, when you update that authorized official for that enrollment, all 10 PTANs are going to have that shared update. So it just depends on how you're set up in PACOS. If for those same 10 PTANs you're set up with 10 different enrollments, it's a separate application for each.
Next question. I'm a delegated official. My role in the IA system is access manager. Is this correct?
Yep, that sounds like an appropriate use of access manager. So there'd be that authorized official, and oftentimes they will delegate those delegated officials as access manager. That doesn't necessarily have to coordinate with what you are in PACOS, but in this case it does. The access manager is really one, they're going to be able to manipulate the enrollment information, and then you're also going to be able to grant access to staff end users and surrogates. So nope, that sounds like appropriate use of that role.
That was our last question.
All right. So before we wrap up today, I do want to leave you with some resources. And the resources here are to that identity and access system if you need to make any updates, along with some FAQs and that quick reference guide that we mentioned earlier in the session to help you with that. I also included links to the Code of Federal Regulations and Chapter 10, that Program Integrity Manual, along with PACOS. So in case you haven't gone into PACOS to try and update this information or just haven't delved into the world of those electronic applications, you have that information. And also on that login page, there's a lot of helpful resources. There's tutorials, there's some FAQs that'll help you through that if you've not, again, submitted electronically before. That ends the presentation for today. On behalf of myself, Tom, and everyone on the GHA Provider Enrollment and Education team, I would like to sincerely thank you all for taking the time to attend today. We do look forward to your survey comments, and again, please make sure you're including topics you'd like to see in the future. Again, thank you everyone for taking the time today. I hope you continue to be well. You may now disconnect.